Hello everyone, thanks for coming, and thanks Alex for hosting me, hosting us. I think you're doing an excellent job. I hope you all agree with that. Unfortunately, not quite such a good job on my part. My laptop won't connect tonight, so we're running these slides over iCloud. It's the first time I've done that, so I'm not quite sure how it's going to work out. I've lost my notes and some of the fonts. Hopefully it's all going to be okay. What could possibly go wrong afterwards? So, as you've heard, I'm Phil Nash, developer advocate at JetBrains, mostly for the C++ tools, also for Swift, and more recently Kotlin and Kotlin native. So if you want to hear any more about that, you can always catch me afterwards, because we're talking about simplicity. Right? So the title I've given it is Seeking Simplicity, and that's a very specific wording, because it's very useful to know about simplicity, and we're going to learn a lot about simplicity, but sometimes you don't actually always want to get there for reasons that we'll get into. But the journey there is really worthwhile, and understanding everything along the way. So that's really the point of that. But to start with, I want to ask you all a question, and that is, it's going to work. Going to find the nations. Here we go.
Yeah.
Who invented the cat flap? Anyone know who invented the cat flap?
Ancient Egyptians.
Who, sorry?
The ancient Egyptians.
Ancient Egyptians? It might be close, actually. It's a trick question, nobody actually knows, but there have been a few proposed solutions to this. A few people have said that it was actually Isaac Newton. In fact, it is. The answer to that story is apocryphal, partly because cat flaps probably have been around for at least a couple of thousand years, so maybe the Egyptians are close. But also because Isaac Newton probably didn't have cats, so it would have been a bit more nice. Nonetheless, it's a really compelling idea, because while it initially sounds a bit surprising, there's something to this idea that it will take someone of the intellect and historical significance of Isaac Newton to invent something as everyday and simple as the cat flap. Something compelling about that idea. And I first heard this story when I was reading Dirk Gently's Holistic Detective Agency on Douglas Adams. Some of you nodding, you've read the book. I pulled out a quote from the book. Just after Dirk Gently relates that story, he says, "It is a rare mind indeed that can render the hitherto non-existent blindingly obvious." And that's really what gets to the core of this intuitive idea that, actually, something that's really simple and obvious in retrospect can actually be quite hard work to get to in the first place. We're going to come back to that idea in a bit. Before we get to that, those fonts really haven't worked well, sorry about that. This next section, I'm just going to run through a few different quotes, mostly from Twitter. But I'm not really designed to teach you anything, but just to sort of convey the collective consciousness and so our intuition about what simplicity is and why we think it's good. There's no judgment here, but you'll probably find yourself agreeing to all of these. So, here we go. First one, simplicity is hard, but complexity is far more expensive. See if I'm nodding along. If you don't actively fight for simplicity in software, complexity will win and it will suck. There's nothing particularly special about these quotes, by the way. I just was looking up them on Twitter and they show up. People talk about this stuff all the time. I really like this next one though. Iatrogenic complexity. It's the complexity introduced by the attempt to make things simpler. I've been caught by that myself many times. Now, before we had Twitter, we had other quotes and books and things. This one, called Gauss's Law, from John Gauss, systems theorist in the 1970s. He said, this is a fairly well-known quote, "A complex system that works is invariably found to have evolved from a simple system that worked." That's quite well known. There's actually a second part that's a bit less well known. "A complex system designed from scratch never works and cannot be patched up to make it work. You have to start over with a working, simple system." This wasn't specific to software. This is just general systems theory that was known back in the 1970s. So nothing's really changed. Quite sobering thoughts. Another fairly well-known quote: "For every complex problem, there is an answer that is clear, simple, and wrong." What I like about this is it's actually fairly self-referential, because it's not actually what he said. He said something very, very similar that meant basically the same thing. So it's actually quite clear, simple, and also wrong. The quote itself. I'm talking of self-referential quotes. Probably the most famous one sometimes called Einstein's razor because similarity with Occam's razor. So you probably know this one. Everything should be made as simple as possible, but no simpler. And we often forget that last part, but no simpler. There's a danger there. There's value in a certain level of complexity. We'll definitely come back to that. Again, this is self-referential, not what he said. What he actually said, well, the closest we've been able to find is this. It can scarcely be denied that the supreme goal of all theory is to make the irreducible basic elements as simple and as few as possible without having to surrender the adequate representation of a single datum of experience. Not quite as simple as that. Someone's actually gone to the lengths of making that as simple as possible, but no simpler. Really like that. By the way, all of those quotes and other references and links throughout this talk, there'll be a single link to a page at the end that has all the references, so don't worry about trying to capture them on the way. Right, so that's just to get us warmed up to show that we all sort of agree on the idea that simplicity is a good thing, complexity is something to be avoided, even if you can't see the words. Sorry about that. Trouble is, talking about simplicity should be quite a vague thing. It's actually quite hard to know exactly what we're talking about. So let's dig into what simplicity actually is. And for most of this section, I'm going to borrow heavily from another talk, very well-known talk, so you may have seen it, by Rich Hickey, called Simple Made Easy. Here he is. So if you haven't seen this talk, do recommend you go away and watch it afterwards. There's some overlap with this one, but a lot that's different as well. Again, there'll be a link at the end. And even if you have seen it, go and watch it again, it's that good. Now what he did is he defined the word simple in terms of its etymology. Because words change over time, and they take on the meaning that we're most using for, so sometimes they get corrupted. So going back to the roots of the word in Latin, and what we find is that the Latin word simplex actually means one fold, or alternatively one braid. Keep that in mind. Contrast that with complex, again from the Latin complexus, means many folds or many braids. You can clearly see the progression there. And for that, in an illustration, again, I stole this directly from Rich Hickey's talk, this illustration. See an example of these strands over here. There's no interleaving between the strands on the simple side, but many folds, many braids on the complex side. And if you think about it, looking at the simple side, we follow one of these strands from the top to the bottom. You have no trouble seeing exactly where it goes. Trivial. But on the complex side, it's actually surprisingly hard to follow it down. You have to look at it really close and really follow it carefully. And it's only 4 strands. But this is something we're going to keep coming back to. How small the limit of complexity is before we have to really struggle to follow it. The other thing to note here is it's not the number of things that makes things complex or simple. They have the same number of strands. It's the crossing over, the interleaving, the folds, or the braids. And really that's what complexity is. It's when things cross over, interconnect, interrelate. Anything like that causes complexity. We're going to look at the implications of that a bit more. Just to dig in a bit more to this idea that the limit on our ability to follow complexity is very small. Let's go do a few examples of cognitive limits. Starting with magic numbers, specifically the magic number 7, plus or minus 2. If this sounds familiar, it's because it's a well-known paper by psychologist George Miller from 1956. Magical number 7, plus or minus 2. What it's talking about is working memory in the brain. And the ability to hold on to discrete pieces of information as you're processing. And things that you can memorize at once. Not long-term memory, but things you're actually dealing with. And what he found was there's a limited number of these sort of hooks in the brain that are about the same for everyone, with a very limited amount of variance, like plus or minus 2. And he said 7 plus or minus 2. Later, other people said actually it's probably closer to 5. That 5 seems to come up a lot. For example, there's another related phenomenon which you're probably all familiar with, you may not have heard the name. This is called supertizing. Who's heard of supertizing? Nobody, right. So you'll know after this. But you'll all be familiar with the concept. Here, there are 4 squares. You don't have to count them. You can look at that and you can see 4. 4ness. And it's not because they're in a pack. If I scramble them up, you can look at that, you can still, most people can see 4 squares without having to count them. And that's what supertizing is, being able to count without counting. And the supertizing limit is about the same as Miller's number, about 5 for most people. Small amount of variance. So if I show you this, it's ever so slightly harder. Maybe you have to count them. Maybe you group them into 2 groups of 3, 3 groups of 2, or 2 and 4, whatever. But most people can't immediately see the 6ness of that. If I do this, now you can see 6 straight away in one go, because we recognise the pattern. That's how we deal with complexity mentally. There's limits in our minds. In psychology we call it chunking, and we'll look at what we call that in programming a bit later. But that's a really key concept. So, just to go into this a bit more, there's actually a video here. I'm not sure if it's going to play on this. I'm going to skip past that, but you've got the point anyway. There is a link to it at the end. Go away and watch the monkey business illusion. If you've seen something like it before, watch it anyway, because watch it all the way to the end. You may find it still surprising. But you're probably a bit short of time anyway, so it's probably a good thing. All right, so back to our simple versus complex. The other thing that Rich Hickey did was he put them up against the words easy and hard. And in particular, drew attention to the fact that we often conflate the ideas of easy and simple. Treat them as the same thing. Let's have a look at the etymology of the word easy. Again, going back through the etymology, we get that from the old French ayes, or ayes, I'm not quite sure how you pronounce it. And probably, because we're not 100% sure on this bit, that comes from the Latin adjacent, from which we get the modern word adjacent. So literally mean lying next to or nearby. Now, if you think about it, that's actually quite a good definition of the word easy. Something that's close at hand, nearby. You don't have to reach far for it. Whether that's physically, or maybe mentally in terms of your knowledge. Something that's close to the knowledge you already have is quite easy. Further away it gets harder. So that's a good model. But we put that up against the definition of simple. We now see there's pretty much no relation at all. They're completely different words with completely different meanings, at least when you trace them back to their roots. And it's not just wordplay. By confusing these ideas, we're actually confusing those underlying concepts. When we say something is simple, we often mean it's easy. It doesn't actually mean it's simple. It might actually be more complex. But we're papering over that fact by calling it simple. So it's actually important to get these words right. So, skipping over some slides from the longer version of this talk, where I brought in, introduce some other words and their meanings. But I want to put these all together with, as well as complicated as well. And often we make the distinction between complex and complicated, the saying complex is the inherent complexity, whereas complicated is where you've artificially introduced complexity, often unnecessarily so. And so, by arranging the words like this, we've now got something a bit like the Agile Manifesto. If you're familiar with the Agile Manifesto, we say that we value the things on the left over the things on the right. But, and the bit people often miss is, it doesn't mean we don't value the things on the right. It's just we have preference. So we value simplicity over complexity. We also value ease over things that are hard, most of the time. And this is captured in the Zen of Python, if you're familiar with that. Simple is better than complex, complex is better than complicated, and it has those same meanings there. So, going right back, we talked about how complexity is not necessarily, or rather simplicity is not necessarily always what you want. Sometimes you actually want complexity. But sometimes, even for its own sake. Now, this is a mechanical watch. We don't tend to have many mechanical watches these days, but it used to be much more prevalent. But one interesting thing about mechanical watches, if you're a watch person, you know this. If you've got an Apple Watch, you probably know as well. Any feature of the watch that's not directly related to telling the time is called a complication. If you think about it in mechanical terms, that makes sense, because it's all going to hang off the same mechanics. And everything you add to that to do something different effectively multiplies the complexity of that mechanism. So most mechanical watches will only have one or two extra features if any. So there's a bit of a market for watches with extra complications. So this one, made for Henry Gray's sometime back in the 40s, I think, it's called the super complication, because it has 24 features. And to my knowledge, it's the most complex watch, at least, and possibly the most complex mechanical device ever created. It took 8 years to design and build this one watch. It's still in operation today, and it sold at auction just a few years ago for $24 million. So sometimes there's real value in even unnecessary complexity. Just another example, when I first did a version of this talk a few years ago, not quite so popular now, but if you have kids of a certain age, you might be familiar with loom bands. Just see these toy bands that you can weave together, make all sorts of complex, intricate things out of. So of course someone took it too far, and they made a dress out of loom bands. And then they put it on eBay, and they sold it for £170,000. In fact, it's slightly more than that. It's £7 for shipping as well. So I think it's fair to say that at least sometimes, when you know what you're looking for, complexity plays. And there are extreme examples to illustrate the point. But usually, the essential complexity of a problem is where the value is. Remember the Einstein quote, simple as possible, but no simpler. So we need to be able to identify what that potential complexity is, not avoid that, just strip away the unnecessary complexity. So the trick really is manage it well. First of all, identifying that, and then managing that complexity. So the rest of this talk is going to be about tools, both the mental and physical, that we have for helping us to do that. So it's time we need to talk about connecting. Most people don't get this joke. There's a film, we need to talk about connecting. This is a bit of an explanation. I also tend to ask, first of all, who's heard of connecting? One person. It's usually just a small number of hands go up in the room. And the next question is, who knew it's pronounced that way? Well done. And who knows what it actually is? Yeah, less hands. Slightly less than one. Right. Well, I'm not an expert in connecting either, but I think it's a really useful tool for at least thinking about things. But to start with those words we've already looked at. We've seen that progression from simple to complex to complicated. But these are based on those specific meanings that we talked about. Complexity, essential complexity, and so on. But words have the meanings that we give them. Sometimes in different contexts they have different meanings. Now in connecting, slightly different order, slightly different meanings. And there's another one, chaotic. Now, put these in like 4 quadrants. It's not a quadrant diagram. These are actually domains. So these are discrete domains, one or the other. They do tend to sort of be in a hierarchy. There's actually 5 domains. The middle one is disorder. Just means you haven't categorized it yet. Because this is a way of categorizing the complexity of a system. Again, this is systems theory. Not specific to software, but applies very well to it. And the idea is that you categorize the complexity in terms of the relationship between cause and effect. How predictable is it? So in a simple domain, everything's fairly trivial, it's well known, understood, things we've done before, you know what to do. A complicated domain, you need experts in that. A complex domain, you can only really work out what happened after the event. But in a chaotic domain, technically cause and effect exists, but you can't really trace it. I'm really going to whiz through this because it's a big subject you can do a whole talk on. But what I want to point out is that you can overlay this with the different types of practices that you can apply in these different domains. So once you've identified the complexity category of your system, you can say, well, if it's simple, then I can apply best practice. When we talk about best practice, a bit of a vague term, but we have our best practices. Only applies in a simple domain. A complicated domain where a lot of our software is good practice, like a subset of that. We immediately see a problem here. We try to apply best practice everywhere, and then wonder what goes wrong half the time. It's probably because we're operating on one of these domains. If you do a Google image search on Cynefin, you'll find other terms that you can apply in each domain. You can find some really useful ways of thinking about, reasoning about the complexity in your system, just by working out which domain it's in. But that's as much as we're going to look at Cynefin there, because I want to get on to abstraction, which is where the meat of this really is. We talked about chunking earlier, when we were talking about cognitive limits. In software, we call it abstraction. Abstracting the complex details into a single thing. But abstraction's a double-edged sword, and this is why. Quote from John Spolsky: all non-trivial abstractions to some degree are leaky. You can see I've slightly grayed out some of the words there. Now I would actually go as far as to take them out and say all abstractions are leaky. I think to the first approximation, that's all we need to say. But what do we mean by that? We mean that as well as the abstraction, we also have to worry about the thing that we're abstracting, because the details are leaking through. And then we have to deal with the leak itself, which means that it's more complex. But, for the quote, all models are wrong, but some are useful. Abstractions can be a useful model. So, let's imagine that we can actually make a watertight abstraction. That would be perfect. I'm going to argue in a moment that that's impossible, but nonetheless, you can imagine this continuum from leaky to watertight. Well, as we said, a leaky abstraction is complex because it involves both the abstraction and the thing you're abstracting. A watertight abstraction will be simple. So that's good, except there's other words we looked at, easy and hard. It's easy to make a complex, leaky abstraction, but it's really hard, too impossible to make a simple watertight abstraction. So the best we can do is just try to close that gap the best we can. So what I'm going to present is, in a moment, as a way to try and do that. But before that, I'm going to try and convince you that leaky abstractions are in fact, watertight abstractions are in fact impossible. We're looking at one of the oldest abstractions we have, which is number. So we have that magic number 7 again, standing in for all numbers. So numbers themselves are abstractions. And they have operations that you can perform with them, like adding numbers together. That works out pretty well. But if you can add numbers, then surely you can take them away as well. So another operation. The trouble is then you've got to worry about 0 or -1. We didn't have those until comparatively recently, like 2nd and 3rd century respectively. So that was a leaky abstraction for a long time. And then multiplication. Well, you can start out in terms of addition, seems simple enough, but then what happens when you divide? The opposite. Well, now you've got to worry about fractions, real numbers. And you've got to worry about rational numbers. And you've got to worry about division by 0. That one's still leaky. That's still undefined. And then squares and square roots. A similar thing. Famously, square root of -1 was another leaky abstraction until comparatively recently, when we sort of waved our hands and defined it in terms of open up a whole new branch of mathematics. It's great, but square roots were discovered or invented, depending on how you look at it, around 1800 BC, whereas imaginary numbers were invented around 1800 AD. So this abstraction alone was leaking for 3,500 years, despite having some of the best minds in civilization working on it. Now, I don't know about you, but that's slightly longer than most of the timescales of my software projects, and a little bit more rigor than I'm prepared to put into it. So if they can't get it right, then I think hoping to get watertight abstractions in our software is probably off limits. There's a whole Wikipedia article on this that goes into all of that. So here's my solution. I don't know what's happened there, but it does say small. The idea is start small. Seems obvious, keep your abstractions small. But how often do we start creating abstractions that we want to make into full-blown metaphors that completely fill out the metaphor? And that's usually where we get into problems. Keep it small. Remember, if it's going to be leaky anyway, then own that. Keep it as small as possible. Closely related, keep it simple. Sounds like a tautology, but what I mean is make it out to simple parts. And we'll talk about composition in a minute. But then you have to split and decide what type of abstraction is your building. Is it what I call, a global abstraction? And by that I mean something like a language or a library, or a big library or a framework, something at that sort of level. In which case you want to make it as watertight and complete as possible. That's where you want to spend the effort doing that. Or if it's something within your application, what we call a local abstraction, then it's not really worth putting that effort in. It's going to be leaky anyway. You're just going to be putting all of your time into doing that and actually making it more complex because of that. Complicating the abstraction with the abstracted. So again, just embrace that. Keep it shallow and small, as we said. Knowing that you're going to have to deal with that extra complexity, so keep that as small as possible. And think about debugging through these layers of abstraction. You're going to be able to understand all those. Then we come to languages and language features. So the recommendation is to favour higher level languages and language features. Doesn't mean that there's no value, again, in the lower level languages. My background is mostly in C++, for example. Not appropriate for all software projects, but where it is, it's perfectly appropriate. And one of the tools we have there is, we alluded to earlier, composition. So, here's a quote on mutable state. I saw on Twitter. What I'm saying is that when the aliens invade, they say that they're still using mutable state. That's when we decide we're only good for food. So yeah, we have this idea that mutable state's bad, but not necessarily a lot of ideas about how to deal with it. And also, what does that have to do with composition? Well, first of all, I should explain, because we skipped over it, this word complex, something that Rich Leakey resurrected. And it's this idea of complicating things that are unnecessary. It's like the verb that means to complicate. So when you complex two things, you're weaving them together. So mutable state, complex, as it weaves together, value and time. It makes sense if you think about it. As long as it's immutable, you only have to reason about its value alone. But if it's mutable, you have to reason about its value at a particular time. That's where it gets complicated. So that's why it's bad. But then he says something else as well, which takes a bit more explaining. He says that refs, discuss what they are, compose value and time. Now, Rich Leakey was the inventor of closure. Refs has a specific meaning in closure. In other languages, it might be called a ref cell, which is slightly different, but same sort of thing. You can do it in most languages. To explain what that actually is, I'm going to use an example. So, find a bit of code, pseudocode. Hopefully you can read it. But so you've got some data types and fields, and you create an instance of it. And then you do your classic concurrency. You're writing something on one side. I'm not actually showing the writing. There we go. Writing on one side and reading on the other side. Race condition, and all sorts of possible problems here. We're talking about concurrency here, but actually it's still a problem even single threading. So how do you deal with this? Well, we make the data type immutable, then the concurrency is not an issue. But now we can't do the writing. We obviously wanted to do that for a reason. So there are techniques for dealing with that. For example, what you typically do is you create a mutated copy of your data type. And some languages have built-in support for this, others you have to do a bit more work. And then when you're actually ready, when it's fully constructed, you might write it back to a single location. And it's only that location that is mutable, and it's atomically mutable. That's what the ref cell basically is. So that would be this assignment down here. So now a single place where that happens. So that can still be a problem if you are reading multiple values from that data type somewhere else. So you do the same thing the other side. You take a copy before you read it. You're taking a copy out of a ref cell, again, it's an atomic operation. And there are ways to make these copies very cheap as well. So don't worry too much about the overhead of it. And if you introduce another thread, do some more writing. Well, you can see we now have these very well-defined synchronization points, where everything has a completely coherent view of what the values of things are, at least with respect to the data type we just talked about. You can do this in most languages. If you've got better support for it, you can actually do it at scale with something called software transactional memory, which coincidentally Closure has, and a few other languages. But even without that, you can actually get quite far just by doing it manually. So that's one possibility. And that's how refs compose value and time. You have these discrete points in time where things happen that you can then reason about in isolation. It takes a bit of getting your head around that. All right, so wrapping up, I think we're already out of time. Sorry. So embrace the essential complexity. Being simple doesn't mean being easy, but it does mean having few interleaving parts, favour high-level languages and features. Value composition over complecting, even between value and time. Beautiful state. No, I'm not ready for that yet. All right, well, let's come to this. Have I got time? I've got 2 more minutes. All right. So that was the end, but there's one more thing. I don't know if you recognise this, you can see it. It's actually a beach just around the corner. See this animation marks. C++ on C is an international C++ conference here in Folkestone. Just around the corner at Leeds Cliff Hall. I ran the first one last February, and next year it's going to be 3 days, 4 tracks on the workshop day next June. Website, on Twitter. So if you do C++ or you know someone who does C++, pass the word on. And that really is the end. And all the references I mentioned are on my website, levelofindirection.com/refs/simplicity.html, so it's anything you need to find. If you can't remember levelofindirection.com, I also have extra levelofindirection.com that redirects them, as well as another levelofindirection.com, and also too many levels of indirection.com, which I think might be too far, but that's it for the talk. Thank you. And I presume I don't